Good morning, everybody. Welcome to PIN, Parent Information Network of Cherry Creek School District. Today, on this monumentous November 3rd, Election Day, hopefully most of you have had the opportunity to get your voice out there. Hopefully, if you haven't, you can do that after our wonderful presentation about eliminating power struggles and moving from conflict to connection. Maybe there's some of this that we can learn and put into practice outside of our families as well. So today you're in for a treat on that topic, but first we would like to welcome Janice McNally, the CCSD Wellness Coordinator of the district, and she is going to give us an update about some things that are going on in the district related to wellness and give us the opportunity to experience something that is the new, well, not so new anymore, buzzword and practice of mindfulness. And we're going to put that into play this morning just in this PSA time, our public service announcement time, which happens before our speaker. So right now, I'd like to turn it over to Janice McNally.
Thanks, Susu, and good morning. I want to thank the PIN board for giving me some time to connect with all of you, and also to all of you for staying engaged as a community through this time. As Susu was indicating, I kind of found myself caught between two different worlds a little bit as I was preparing my remarks for you today. And I realized I was really struggling with the magnitude of the day locally and nationally, and how to give that space while also giving you all support. And I had started pulling together my to-do list that represents those updates and that range of resources we've assembled to support parents and caregivers, and by extension, our 55,000 students. And as a type A'er, that is really my go-to move. And I will still share that with you. When I'm done speaking, I will drop a number of different links into the chat that represent updates, resources in different locations on our website that you can explore more thoroughly on your own. I will also drop my email address down in there too, if you have any questions about that information, and after you have a chance to look it over. So, like I said, I'm going to share those in the links. And where I find myself was shifting from a to-do list to a to-be list, because I know that's what I need right now. And I really have no doubt if we focus on how we want to be during this significant time, the rest kind of takes care of itself. And stress and anxiety right now are really thriving in uncertainty. And there's plenty of certainty to go around these days, from national and local politics to a global pandemic and a modern day civil rights movement. I put my fingers on a couple surveys that really illustrate this. The American Psychological Association recently indicated that more than 2/3 of American adults were significantly stressed about the election. Another report, based upon a compilation of 3 surveys through a nonpartisan group called More in Common, indicated that in about 7 in 10 Americans are worried about the risk of widespread violence breaking out across the country after election results are announced. And so, with so much out of our control, the single biggest, best starting point for navigating it for ourselves and for helping our kids to do the same is to focus on what is within our control. And once we start to really do that, we realize that that list is not insignificant. These things can really serve as our anchors at a time when we're feeling really unmoored, and they serve as a resilience blueprint for guiding us in unprecedented times. So let's take a look at that to-be list. First of all, we can control following best current safety practices: maintaining physical distance, wearing a mask, and remembering frequent hand washing. We can control maintaining and keeping a reasonable schedule and routine for ourselves, for our households, for our kids, until something comes along that disrupts that. And then we can remember the importance of flexibility, grace, patience, compassion, and self-compassion. We can control focusing on good sleeping habits, regular exercise, and proper nutrition. These things make the well-being list time and time again because they've been proven again and again to be highly impactful. Wherever you are with those, just take one additional step in the right direction. 10 minutes of exercise if you currently get none now. Along with everything else on this to-be list, they support healthy and strong immune systems. We can also control our breath, for it is always with us and serves as a portable self-regulation tool. So let's tap into that now with some belly breathing. If you're new to belly breathing, it can be helpful to start by getting in a comfortable position in your chair or on the floor or wherever you are right now. Comfortable means exactly what it means to you. For a lot of people, it means resting their hands in their lap, keeping their back straight but not stiff, shoulders relaxed, and you can choose to either close your eyes or look down at a fixed point on the floor. Another newbie sort of belly breathing helpful tool is to put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly right above your belly button. That way, if you feel the hand on your chest rising and the hand on your belly not, you just need to focus a little bit more on the instructions. So go ahead and settle into that comfortable position for you, either choosing to close your eyes or focusing them on a fixed point on the floor. And go ahead and breathe in slowly to the count of 5 through your nose as though you were breathing in your favorite flower, candle, or other scent. Filling your belly like a balloon. And breathing out slowly through your mouth as if you're blowing out a candle. Try repeating that 5 times on your own. In through your nose to the count of 5, and out through your mouth to the count of 5. Feeling your belly rise as you breathe. And go ahead and gently bring yourself back. If that's hard for you and you felt your chest rising, you're not alone. By adulthood, most of us carry our breathing in our chests. And if you ever watch a baby sleeping, babies don't do that. Babies breathe through their bellies. We learn to hold our stress and anxiety in our chest and inhibit our breathing and the oxygen that the rest of our body gets by not taking full breaths through our belly. And the good news is there's plenty of opportunities to practice throughout the day. So we can also control what we focus on. There's many ways to practice this. One way is to set an intention for the day. The morning is actually the time of the day where we have the most self-control. So let's tap into that and take it to our advantage. Go ahead and get a mental picture of how you want to be today. If it's helpful to close your eyes, do so. Now find a word that captures that. Do you want to be patient, kind, compassionate, calm, understanding? Find a word that captures your highest to be priority for the day. Now visualize yourself maintaining that intention in the face of your daily triggers and challenges, which are most highly predictable. Take your mind through your day. What does it look like, for instance, to be patient in the midst of your predictable struggles? Anticipating those moments and visualizing them will help us to tap back into our intentions when they arise. Will you take a breath? Will you repeat a mantra? Will you gently remind yourself of your intention? What will it look like and how will it feel to respond in a manner that reflects your intention? We can utilize something called habit stacking to stay engaged with our intentions throughout the day. One of the best ways to build a new habit is to identify a current habit and then stack your new behavior on top of that. For example, when you are hand washing, remember one of our big three? Repeat your mantra and do some belly breathing. We can also control what we pay attention to. Our brain neurology is by design more tuned into the negative. We know this. It's a hardwired instinct that has allowed us to survive as a species. That same mechanism can get in our way of thriving in everyday life. Even before the pandemic hit, our brains were inclined this way. And now for many of us, the pandemic has reset our baseline of stress and anxiety to a higher level, making it so we are constantly, unconsciously, and regularly scanning our environment for threats. Decreased personal contact and inability to read facial cues due to masks and hours spent interacting virtually intensify all of that. Cultivating gratitude and positivity is not about sugarcoating difficult times or suppressing strong emotions or feeling badly for having strong emotions. It's important to not feel bad about difficult and strong emotions. All feelings are valid and are likely a normal and reasonable response to a very stressful time. Studies show that people who resist acknowledging their darker emotions or judge them harshly can end up feeling more psychologically stressed. In other words, try to avoid feeling bad about feeling bad. Rather, cultivating positivity and gratitude is about acknowledging that we have the negative bias in our brain and being deliberate about offsetting it. It's knowing that our brains won't necessarily do this on its own. Even when we're not experiencing an event, our thoughts about that event use the same neural pathways as when we're experiencing it. And this is true in both directions. When we bring conscious awareness to positive experiences, we strengthen those regions of the brain associated with happiness and resilience. And when we ruminate on negative experiences, we strengthen the regions of the brain associated with stress and depression. So I invite you to participate in a reflection derived from Rick Hanson's work in Hardwiring Happiness. This reflection is called ROSE, and it's a simple process for engraving the good things that we experience over the course of any day into the neural structure of our brains. So if you'd like to participate, go ahead and get into that comfortable, mindful body again. Again, for many people, that's feet flat on the floor, hands resting in their laps, back straight but not stiff, shoulders relaxed, eyes closed or looking down. And as you settle in, take a minute to check in with your breath. No need to change it in any way. Just noticing that you're inhaling and exhaling. Now I want you to shift your attention to a positive experience. It doesn't have to be a grand experience. Good things happen all around us, but much of the time we don't notice them. Take the time in this singular moment to recognize a positive experience. It could be the sun shining on your way to work, a pet happy to see you at the end of the day, the feeling of your child's small hand in yours. Now observe how this recognition makes your body feel. Where in your body do you feel it? Does the moment cause your shoulders to soften? Your body to feel lighter? Your tension and tightness to dissipate? Does it cause you warmth or give you chills? Take these extra seconds from when you recognize the moment to observe the impact on your body. Soak it in and savor this experience. Let your attention remain on this singular experience. Imagine yourself as a pancake, and this experience is the syrup soaking in. Let it fill up every fiber of your being. Engrave it into your being by holding it in your consciousness, shining the spotlight of your attention onto it. And as you're ready, go ahead and bring yourself on back. Making it a habit to look for 4 or 5 roses every day shapes our brain to notice more roses throughout the day. Engraving them by sharing them with others or journaling about them magnifies the positive impact. We can also control how we treat ourselves and others. When we slip up and fall short of how we want to be, when we don't carry through on our intention, will we choose to respond to ourselves with self-criticism and negative self-talk, or to respond to ourselves with a simple breath? Will we call ourselves whatever has become our go-to name in that moment? Or will we change our conversation that we have with ourselves and remind ourselves that imperfection is a part of the human experience? Research says that if we do the latter, we are more likely to achieve our goals. This isn't just mushy stuff. Contrary to popular belief, science tells us that self-compassion doesn't make us soft and complacent, but rather goal-oriented and motivated. So that's your resilience blueprint. I hope it was helpful. And I will, like I said, drop into the chat links that we have on our district website to a number of resources to help you, your kids, your families. Some of the resources are things like virtual calming rooms, different soothing exercises, some of the breathing techniques we talked about today, all the way up to just some resources around the connection between vaping and COVID-19 to serve as a little bit of a cautionary tale and information for parents and students to be aware of, as well as just a link to the district's suicide prevention webpage, because we've recently added some more information to that. So watch for that in the chat, and I will switch gears to doing that here in just a minute. Thank you. Thank you all for your time.
Wow, that was really a great way to start the morning, Janice. Thank you. And something that's very doable for us to do, whether we're staying in our homes or we're driving somewhere, walking, starting the morning. Just what a great way to think about your day. Instead of having just a to-do list, that you have a to-be list, and how much more valuable might that be with your family and all the other people that you are in contact with, as well as yourself. So thank you. That was really cool. We have a few minutes before we are starting our main speaker, Kaylee, who is going to speak with us about eliminating power struggles. If you didn't already, go get yourself a notebook and a pen. Open your laptop to a new page that you can start taking some notes when this topic comes up. We know that PEN is thankfully still here for you as a resource during this crazy year. Please know, if you haven't already checked out our website, PIN.ccsd.org, that you can hop on at any time of the day and night. You can find links to our past presentations this year that are now videos, versus our previous years. Those are just podcasts that you can listen to while you're walking or making dinner or just sitting and enjoying this awesome week that we're going to enjoy this week. But all of that is on the website. You can find some resources. We'll put the resources that Janice is talking about. We can get those in our PIN website on the resource page. We'd also like to express our gratitude to all of our 4 platinum sponsors, with a 5th one on the way. Right now, our platinum sponsors are Happy Canyon Flowers, the Nectar Group, who presented last month on ADHD and executive function. Those are available online. Induc College Impressions, and Chile Camps, that has been around in Colorado for 100 years. So we are so appreciative for their continued support, especially during these hard economic times, in an organization like PIN that is here and was created from the ground up over 40 years ago to support parents and families as they go about the very difficult task of raising the next generation of kids to adults. Everything we do at PIN is here to support our families, to inspire and educate and inform you. And you know that if you've got a topic of concern, that you are more than happy to reach out to us and let us know what you'd like to learn more of, and we can see if we can make that happen. So right now, I'd like to turn over our time to Kaylee with Sandstone Cares. She can tell you a little bit about herself and her background as she jumps into a topic that we all need, of how to put out power struggles and turn them into something positive instead of something that is draining. So, Kaylee, welcome to PIN, and thank you for being here. Thank you for donating your time and your energy and your expertise.
Of course, thank you for having me.
I will be paying attention to the Q&A for all of you who are out there. If you have a question for Kaylee, go ahead and jot it in the Q&A. And as I see something that comes up that would be an appropriate time to bring to your attention, I will let you know, and we can incorporate questions right through the presentation if that works for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I am so used to having more of a conversational style. So I was told today might be a little bit more presentation-like, and I was like, okay, I'll try. So feel free if you guys have questions or comments. I have an idea of where we'll go and what we'll talk about, but if we get off on a rabbit trail that proves useful, then that sounds good to me. So let's just start off. Part of the umbrella is power struggles, and I want to give you guys kind of a brief summary of where we might go, what the outline might be, and then we'll dive into each topic. So typically, power struggles are something that result as a part of a normal adolescent development. So our adolescents are going through a stage of development. Pretty typically, they're in the stage of development. Erickson calls it identity versus role confusion. So before they get to that stage, it's really helpful to dive into attachment. So starting at 0 years old, we start to build an attachment, first with our primary caregivers and then with our world around us. And so as we develop those attachments, we set the stage for the stage of identity versus role confusion to either go well, or we already have predispositions that are going to make that stage tenuous because our attachment styles are already kind of fragile. So that's something that's helpful to note. So we'll talk a little bit about attachment styles. And then, of course, when our adolescents enter into the stage of identity versus role confusion, the parenting style may actually shift because we're helping them with a different stage of development. The stages of development prior to identity versus role confusion may actually be facilitated by a greater amount of parental involvement and support. And identity versus role confusion, I've interacted with lots of parents who are fantastic at helping their kids through the previous stages of development just because they feel like they know what they're doing. And then they enter into this stage of development and they're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And what I used to do used to work really well. So why is it not working anymore? And so knowing that they're entering into that new stage of development can be really helpful. So that's typically when we can enter into this power and control dynamic, because we can't pick up our kids and move them anymore, and we can't lock them in the room anymore. And they've kind of gotten smart enough to know that they don't have to anymore. And so it becomes much more apparent to us and apparent to them that we can't make them do really anything at that point. And so we either develop this power and control dynamic, or we develop the opposite empowerment dynamic. And of course, you're not going to be great at it to begin with. My encouragement to parents is if you are stumbling through life and you're not running into the same barrier over and over again, that's okay. If you're getting stuck and you're running into that same barrier, that's when there is a problem. So we can learn through failure just like we can allow our adolescents to learn through failure. And similarly, when there are changes, so when your adolescent's trying to figure out who they are and who they want to be, there are changes that you may want them to make or changes that they may want to make, and knowing how the change process works can help us track how they're developing or maybe how they're stalling in developing. And it can help us to know if things are getting stuck or if things are naturally progressing. And then if we are able to navigate this stage in an empowerment style, most likely what we're using is some form of like the Socratic method or motivational interviewing. So motivational interviewing is what I like to teach parents because it is for counselors, but it's also very applicable to parenting. You cannot parent your adolescent 100% of the time using motivational interviewing. So this is going to be really a part of parenting and not all of parenting, because at some point, motivational interviewing is a way of conversing, but at some point you are the parent and there are some decisions that you are going to have to make for your adolescent rather than going, playing in the street seems like a good idea to you. Okay, well, let's try it and see how it goes, right? So we'll kind of talk not only about the spirit of motivational interviewing, but also the principles of motivational interviewing, as well as the techniques, which are sometimes called the strategies. So that's kind of our layout. So let's start. I'm a huge fan of screen sharing because I learn through watching as well as through hearing. So let's start with The power and control struggle versus the empowerment dynamic, so that you have an idea of when you are off track and when you are on track. Okay. So on the left, you can see this is the power and control dynamic. This is actually the dynamic that if you were to enter into domestic violence treatment, this is the dynamic that you would be working on changing rather than just trying not to hit people. Because what we've learned through behaviorism is, let's say I do hit people. And if we extinguish the behavior without giving me more tools, my dysfunction is actually just going to sneak into another area of life. So at the residential level of care, for example, if we have an adolescent who's struggling with substances, if we take them to residential care and we virtually eliminate their access to substances, sometimes what we find is that dysfunction finds a new outlet. For instance, restrictive eating, binging and purging, over-exercising, sex, relationships. Maybe on the outside, that might look something like porn or gambling or just thrill seeking, all of those kind of things. So that's why behaviorism tends to fall short, is the behavior has a function, and until we figure out how to actually address the real problem, the behavior is just going to manifest in different ways. So power and control dynamic, we have three players. We're gonna have the victim, the criticizer, and the rescuer. This doesn't mean you need three people, because typically what we do is we dance around the triangle. So you could have two people, you could have 5 people, doesn't really matter. I'll give you an example of how this might work. So I had a parent one time explain a situation between them and their adolescent. So their adolescent came to them, and what I'm going to say is victim stance, because they asked the parent, hey parent, can I go to so-and-so friend's house? And this is a friend that both the parent and the adolescent knew who they were, and the only thing that happened at that person's house, which was using. So to ask to go to that person's house and to go cover over all of their problems with substances is a victim stance. However, it gets verbalized. So what the parent did is they tried real hard to reflectively listen and keep their calm and set a boundary. No, I'm not going to take you over there, all that fun stuff. But the adolescent kept asking, right? Some adolescents might shift into a criticizer role at this point of, why are you trying to control me so much? It's just so-and-so. We won't use, I can't believe you don't trust me, things like that, right? So what the parent did is they kind of lost their cool, and they started criticizing the adolescent. I can't believe you're asking to go over to that person's house. You know, whatever the things are. Criticism typically is about someone's character, right? So you might say things like, you're lazy. If you tell someone they're being a victim, that's probably a little indication that you might be in the criticizer role at that point. And so just criticizing what's going on with the adolescent. Then the parent jumped into victim mode. Not only can I not believe you're asking me to go, but I can't believe the position that you're putting me in. Can you not see how this is going to be bad for our relationship, and you're stressing me out and I can't do this with you? So then the adolescent naturally felt bad. The parent naturally felt guilty for their explosion. So they jumped into the rescuer role and they took their kid to their friend's house. Does that make sense how we might dance around that triangle? Okay, so the good news is that for each position in this power and control triangle that we don't want to be in, there is an opposite position for the empowerment triangle on the right that we want to get into. So some things that are characteristic of victims are feelings like powerless, helpless, and hopeless. If you hear yourself think, I can't, I have to, or you are making me. Your alarm bells should go off. Victims by their nature don't think they have any choices. So if we're to move into that creator role, then we might start to analyze what our choices are, even if none of them sound great. Choices by their very nature are limited. And so oftentimes when we're sitting in the victim role, we deny that we have any choices, but that's really because all of our choices have benefits and losses. And we might choose a choice because of its benefit and ignore its losses. And we might fail to choose other choices because all we can see are the losses. So creators have a more balanced, rhythmic approach to what are the benefits of this choice? What are the consequences and maybe the losses of this choice? Which one do I want to choose? Even if it goes bad after that point, I'm not a victim, I'm a creator. I tried my best with the information I had, didn't go well for me. I can learn through failure. Let me try this again. Cool. Then criticizers are going to move to challengers. So the problem with criticism is that it doesn't actually offer a opportunity for correction and change, because criticism is about someone's character. So if someone is bad, there's no way they can change that. Challengers identify an aspect that is bad, and if the person is not bad, they might actually be functional enough to change that aspect. So that's where challengers come in. I always like to think of engineer teams. So if we were all on an engineering team creating a phone together and we didn't have any challengers, we were all just encouraging one another to try our best, how would that phone release go for us? Not well, because the rest of the world will surely tell us when we didn't apply any pressure to our own ideas, all of the areas when they apply pressure that it falls short. So challengers are really important and really helpful. Okay, then rescuers are going to want to move to coach. The difference between rescuer and coach is really important. But it's also something, it's not so black and white, so you're really going to have to feel it out. Okay, so the opposite of love is fear. Coaches operate out of love, rescuers operate out of fear. Coaches refuse to do for others what they can do for themselves because they see a learning opportunity for the other to become more self-sufficient. Rescuers do for others what they could do for themselves, which seems like helping, but really by continuing to do things for others that they can do themselves and taking all of the pressure off of them to be a functional human, we actually disable their ability to function. So think of when we send astronauts into space, there is less gravity in space than on Earth. There's less gravity, on Mars, whatever it is, and your body adapts. And one of the ways we've learned that it adapts is your heart actually becomes less efficient and your bones become less dense. That way, when you come back to Earth, you have health problems. So I like to think of rescuers as almost trying to take all of the gravity off of someone else, because we think it helps, feels nice in the moment, but what it actually does is it disables them to handle pressure. Another big difference is that coaches stand on the sidelines. So I always think, when I think of coaches, I think of my poor high school soccer coach who did his very best to teach us how to play soccer and then had to stand on the sidelines all game long watching us murder his instructions, right? He did not run out onto the field and go, "You're doing it wrong, I'll do it," right? Which seems very obvious during a game of soccer, but it can actually not seem so obvious in parenting. So the challenge in parenting is, how do we stay on the sidelines actually and have an influence? That's another big change between a power struggle and an empowerment dynamic. Power struggles are about control. Empowerment is about influence. So sometimes I actually may have the most influence by just telling somebody what to do. They may listen. But if that doesn't work, and that seems maybe counterproductive, then I'm going to actually have to switch tactics in order to maintain influence, since I can't just tell this person what to do. So that's really the crux of shifting from that power dynamic to the empowerment dynamic. So now you have an overview of what you're trying to do, but it's, as you can imagine, kind of hard to implement. So the devil is usually in the details. So let's talk a few details. So in adolescence, your adolescents are becoming more mobile, more powerful. Their brains are growing, and so they're actually beginning to question. So when you told them when they stole a piece of gum when they were 8 that stealing gum is wrong, and then took them back to the store to apologize to the person and give the gum back, you are, in their minds, essentially God, right? You said it was wrong, so it's wrong. I should feel bad about it. We should go apologize. Let's do it. But when they start to get 13, 14 and above, they're going to go, well, is it wrong? Because those are your values, but I don't know if they're my values, right? So a power and control dynamic parent would respond with, yes, it's wrong because I said so. So stop it. And don't even question if it's wrong, because that's some form of disrespect or challenging of authority. So don't do it. Now, the problem with that is we're actually short-circuiting their developmental stage, which is, it doesn't matter if you think it's wrong as a parent. It actually only matters now if they think it's wrong. So sometimes questioning the moral in and of itself is the process of confirming that moral for yourself. Now, what parents are afraid of is questioning the moral is going to lead to dropping the moral. And that is a possibility. And we have to kind of face that with what DBT would call radical acceptance. Our adolescents, there's no way that we can make them value honesty. It's just not possible. So a empowering parent might go, okay, you're in adolescence. You're trying to figure out if I just value honesty or if you also value honesty. So what do you think about it, right? These conversations are going to feel weird because your adolescent has a lot of unfiltered thoughts, and often in conversations we feel compelled to respond instead of just being a sounding board. And so that's where, when we get into the techniques and the strategies of motivational interviewing, the foundational technique is reflective listening. In reflective listening, you don't have to respond. And so I've had plenty of conversations with adolescents that would be completely socially atypical. Something like, okay, so you think you can use heroin like once a week and no more, and it won't be a problem for you. Cool. Tell me more about that. That feels weird, huh? Right? Because many adolescents and many people are going to see my lack of resistance as acceptance or agreement. And that's not what it's about with reflective listening. We are actually refraining from any kind of response. We're not agreeing, we're not disagreeing, we're not responding at all. We're just reflecting. What I hear you saying is you're thinking you can use heroin weekly and keep it at that, and that's a good plan for your life. Is that correct? That's all it is, right? So as we maintain that posture in their internal development, they actually develop more. That doesn't mean that they don't have any choices and consequences for their behavior. So that choices and consequences behavior or discussion is not what we're doing today. My recommendation for you guys, I really appreciate the book, Parenting Teens with Love and Logic. There do need to be choices and consequences for their behavior. So we can't let adolescents explore the world and not have them explore a world that's based in reality. So for example, if they steal something and they get caught with it, and we advocate on their behalf that the police don't do anything about it, that's not helping them understand choices and consequences. So we're not having that conversation right now, but that conversation does exist. And so that's kind of the other half of this coin. So this coin is, we're not trying to dictate or control their choices and consequences. So the most important thing in these conversations is helping them internally work through those choices and consequences. It's going to be super helpful if when they enter into adolescence, they already have a secure attachment to you or to other healthy adults or extended family, things like that. I like when there's a TED Talk called Everything You Know About Addiction Is Wrong. And at the end, he talks about addiction is the opposite of connection. So the most important thing we can do prior to adolescence is solidify that connection, because we know our adolescents are going to put that connection on the back burner with us during adolescence, and that's very developmentally normative. But if we have in some way failed to make that connection prior to adolescence, it's going to make this developmental stage harder. So the attachment, there are, I would say, 4 attachment styles. One would be secure, one would be insecure or anxious, the other one would be avoidant, and the final one would be disorganized or chaotic. So to kind of explain a little bit about attachment styles, I like to think of two circles, which represent 2 humans. And your first job in life as a tiny baby is to what with your primary caregiver? To attach, right? Yes. And if you don't, what happens? I encourage parents not to overthink this question. You die. If you don't attach to a primary caregiver and you're a tiny baby, you're just going to die. If you can't get anyone to get with you, then you can't get taken care of. Okay. Now your second goal, and this is going to happen around the developmental phases of 2 as well as adolescence, is not to attach, but it's actually to individuate, so that you create this nice little Venn diagram of a relationship where part of it is me and part of it is you and part of it is we. And in that Venn diagram, those are what we call our boundaries. So we want little dashed lines in between the me and the we and the you and the we, so that both of us can go in and out of the we and the me. That's what we would call secure attachment, is that we both are capable of and likely to connect, and then we're both capable of having a time of separation. So what that's going to look like is, maybe I, as the child, I can tolerate physical separation. We all kind of can see this in like kindergarten or preschool, or maybe even daycare or grandma's house, where kids at first struggle with the idea of, if I leave you, is our relationship still stable? And through experience, they learn, yes, indeed, it is stable. Well, hopefully they learn that. They're going to learn that if your relationship is secure and there's secure attachment. Okay. So anxious attachers are going to cling to the we and not be able to tolerate the me. And that's primarily because through experience or perception or whatever it is, the child has perceived that they need to cling to a connection in order to maintain it. Now, the opposite of that, the other style, which would be avoidant, is that the child somehow learns that they would rather be in the me place than the we place. So that means something about the connection feels uncomfortable or harmful. So this might be, if I have an abusive parent, I might decide that I'm safer, I'm more comfortable, I'm just better off by myself. So I'm not going to run to them. Let's say I'm 2 and I scrape my knee. A securely connected parent I'm going to scrape my knee, I'm going to feel pain. I'm going to run to my parent because I feel pain and I know they comfort me. They're going to pick me up, put me on their lap and say, man, you have an owie, don't you? They're going to acknowledge my pain. And then they're going to say, I'm here with you. Do you want a Band-Aid? Maybe we should clean that up, right? An anxiously attached child, their parent may not come, right? So they may scream and cry and so-and-so has 3 jobs, or so-and-so has 3 other kids, or mom or dad has their own mental health or addiction struggles, or they're physically not there. And so the idea of connection is going to be scarce. So they're going to be more likely to be clingers. Now, on the avoidant side, maybe I scrape my knee and I run to my parent. My parent yells at me because I shouldn't have been running. And so maybe I learn that when I run for that connection and that comfort, I get punishment or chastisement. And so it's not comforting. So I'd be better off just comforting myself. And then disorganized or chaotic can come from disorganized or chaotic environments. This is not the only way to get a disorganized or chaotic attachment, but I typically use the example of a parent who's in addiction. So if I'm 2 and my mom comes home and on some days she's awesome and I run to her and she picks me up and she tells me how much she loves me and we play. And then on other days I run to her and when she's drunk, she's kind of angry. And so some days I run to her and she hits me. I'm 2. I can't figure out why this is happening. So I might just kind of throw things against the wall, so to speak, to see what sticks. And that may become my pattern of attaching. So already in adolescence, if you have an anxious or avoidant or chaotic attacher, it's going to make this stage more difficult to traverse. But if you have a secure attacher, they're going to naturally want some distance anyway. And that's probably going to naturally set off some alarm bells in your head as a parent, because you're wondering, uh-oh, did I do something wrong? Why don't you want to hang out with me anymore? Why don't you want to talk to me anymore? What's going on? And typically, if you do have a secure attacher and they are meeting all their developmental goals, that's actually not a problem, because we actually want them to attach more to their friends and other healthy adults, because that's their developmental phase. It's kind of like they've already attached to you, they've already got you, and they're moving on. And as long as we can navigate the teenage years, they'll come back, right? When they get hungry enough, they'll come home, whatever the things are. And so allowing them that space and that distance to attach to others is actually part of the parental process and the parental task. So managing our own anxiety, our own fears of abandonment, our own fears of what a crazy human they're going to be if we let them out into the world, all of that kind of stuff. I get into lots of conversations with parents and adolescents in the residential level where they're arguing about friends. And really, they're arguing about the wrong thing. The problem is typically not other people. That's actually kind of a victim stance mentality, because we are externalizing our problem onto other humans. The problem is that the adolescent is choosing those other people. That's how they have learned to attach. And so the better question is, why do you choose these people and not those people? What's going on? These people must be better for some reason, or you wouldn't choose them. So help me understand. And the developmental task of adolescence is to learn how to choose people, to learn how to be acquaintances with people who aren't the best instead of friends, to have boundaries or distance with people who are hurting me, and to acknowledge, that's why our name is Sandstone, shaped by the things around it. We are people who are shaped by the people around us. And that's backed by really good research that you are most like the 5 people who you spend the most quantity of time with. All right, so let's move into stages of change. So stages of change, I'm going to pull this one up as well. Stages of change, this research comes from essentially the development of psychology in America. So at first, our psychologists in kind of like the 1950s or so were all about behaviorism. How do we get a thing to do what we want? And how do we stop the thing from doing what we don't want? Think of a rat running a maze or whatever it is. How do we make things do things? As I explained earlier, behaviorism found its limits, okay? And so I would say it's probably about in the 80s, especially in the criminal justice system, where we started to ask ourselves, why do some people change and some people don't? So, for example, when we send some people to prison, they make changes. When we send, to be fair, most people to prison, they just learn how to survive prison better, and it's not making the changes we want. So why not? And then we figure, well, maybe they haven't learned their lesson enough. Maybe the punishment wasn't enough. So let's do it again. Let's try again. And so then we get these 50-year-old men who have been in prison 5 times, and we wonder why they don't know how to function in society. So the stages of change came from this idea of, is it possible to help people who don't want your help, who don't want to change, or is it not? And what we found is, yes, indeed, counseling works for people who don't want help. And here's how. So the stages of change, we'll start with pre-contemplation here at the top. Pre-contemplation, the prefix pre means before. To contemplate means to think about. So this is before I think I have a problem. Any behavior that you do and keep doing, you are in pre-contemplation about changing. You don't think you have a problem with it. Compared to your other choices, seems good. The next stage, should we continue in the change process, is contemplation. Contemplate, to think. I wonder if I have a problem. I wonder if this is my best choice. Now, within contemplation is a really important aspect of the change process called ambivalence. And if you don't know what it is, it's going to feel like you're talking to a crazy person. And if you do know what it is, you're going to see that they're actually progressing in the stages of change. So ambivalence is when I'm wondering if I have a problem. Sometimes I'm going to say yes, and sometimes I'm going to say no. And I'm just going to go round and round and round and round until I decide. So contemplation is either going to lead me back to pre-contemplation, turns out I don't have a problem, or it's going to push me forward to preparation. In preparation, I have decided I have a problem, I want to change it. But most changes don't happen overnight, so I need to prepare, right? So within contemplation, I'm going to go round and round and round, and the intention, the thing we need to do with contemplation is we need to do it well, not we need to do it quickly, okay? And so in contemplation, I'm really considering yes or no, do I want to make this change? And if I continue along the change process, I'm going to reach preparation, which is yes, I have a problem. Yes, I want to change it. How would I change it? So for example, in preparation, an adolescent might decide, my parents are driving me crazy, and I would like them to drive me less crazy. So my problem is that I feel crazy around my parents. I'm probably not going to figure out how to change that overnight. So I need to prepare. Maybe I should learn other ways that I could deal with them. Or maybe I should find supports. Or maybe, sometimes they don't make me feel crazy. So maybe we should do more of what's working. Those are some of those preparation things. Now, for a parent, you could also see, my adolescent is saying they don't like me anymore, or whatever it is. And that's probably not going to change overnight. So what do I need to prepare to do in order to enter into action? So action is the first day of the change that I stated I would make. So for example, I believe that in residential treatment, we never actually get to action until the day after discharge, because the goal is not to be a functional human in a controlled environment. The goal is to be a functional human in your original environment. So action is when we actually make the change. We actually do the thing. We're no longer doing the preparatory behaviors. We're doing the thing. And then it takes at least 6 months to a year to enter into maintenance. Maintenance is the phase where that new behavior is starting to feel more familiar than the old way. But we can all imagine what the struggles with consistency and, all of that kind of stuff would be. Now, the only thing I don't like about this document is that it shows relapse as kind of part of the process. I believe relapse is an optional part of the process, as evidenced by the reality that not everyone relapses. So relapse may happen, it may not. I like to distinguish between a lapse and a relapse. So lapses are a temporary, kind of like tripping over a crack in the sidewalk. I used once, I yelled once, I forgot once, I chose not to once, whatever the things are. A relapse is returning to the old pattern of behavior. I like to refer to relapse as you tripped over a crack in the sidewalk and you face planted. Now, another thing that's important about this dynamic is it's not linear. The change process is not linear. So I might go from pre-contemplation to contemplation, and then maybe I try to jump all the way to action, right? So I've decided I don't want my parents to drive me crazy anymore. I'm just gonna be super duper nice to them. So I jump into action and try to be super duper nice. And that works until I explode. So I jump back to pre-contemplation because my parents are crazy people and I can never get along with them. And then maybe I'm like, okay, well, I have to survive them for the next 3 years. So I'm going to go back to contemplation and decide if I can do this. Okay, maybe I'll try a different way this time. Now I'm in preparation, right? See how that works? So it's not linear and you bounce around just like you might bounce around the grief cycle. So those are the processes of change. And these are the processes of change for an individual. Now, what's helpful, and you guys will have to let me know, I can send out all of these documents, but each stage of change can be facilitated by certain interventions. Now, these interventions are your counselor interventions, but a lot of them can also be used by parents. So for example, if I'm in the pre-contemplation stage of change, it is not helpful let's go down to pre-contemplation, to help me try to clarify my goals and strategies for change. Because you know what I'm going to say? I don't care. Leave me alone, right? Similarly, if I'm already in preparation and I'm trying to have a conversation with you about I really want to walk the dog more often because I know I feel better when I do. And you're up here trying to say, well, how's our relationship? Do you feel like I'm someone who you can share with and who will listen to you? Yeah, I wouldn't be sharing with you unless I thought you were someone I could share with. Moving on to what I'm trying to do. Make sense? So it's important to kind of identify the stage of change and then respond appropriately. So that leads us to these two stages of change, okay? Contemplation, pre-contemplation are usually what parents struggle with the most. Typically, once someone gets to preparation and they're asking for your advice or whatever it is, then honestly, most humans kind of can stumble through that stage of change just fine. But the problem with our teenagers is they're exploring things that make us uncomfortable. And so we get into that power struggle. So within pre-contemplation, please hear me when I say extrinsic motivators for change. That means I don't want to change, but my consequences are such that I am suffering, right? So that's where choices and consequences would come in. If I'm an adolescent and I'm using, and my parents don't monitor, they provide it for me, they do it themselves, I may not actually qualify the criteria for addiction, because part of the criteria for addiction is continued use despite negative adverse consequences. So if I don't have any, I'm going to keep using, right? So that's a different conversation, but to be noted, because I'm not trying to get you guys to be just like passive conversation partners with your children. I am trying to help you be conversation partners, but that's not all of parenting. So here, a lot of what we're going to focus on today is the asking permission, the building rapport, keeping the door open, normalizing ambivalence. Remember the difference between feeling like you're talking to a crazy person and feeling like you're talking to someone who's working their way through the stages of change. Helping the speaker weigh pros and cons, examining their values, finding intrinsic desire for change. So if I may start a change just to get my parents to leave me alone. Or what's more likely is I may start a change because a boy I like or a girl I like thinks that's good, right? So I'm gonna try it. In the contemplation stage, once I start to internalize that, I might start to ask, are there any reasons why I want to make this change? Imagine short-term and long-term choices. And here's where we're at when we're in the empowerment triangle. Emphasize the speaker's choice, responsibility, and self-efficacy for change. If we're in the power and control dynamic, we're actually subverting our adolescents' self-efficacy if we're telling them what to do or how much they're not good at doing things or we're doing for them. And we're also subverting their choice or their responsibility if we get into that power struggle, because that means we have a focus on something other than helping them to internalize the change that we're hoping they make. All right, so at this point, is it Susu, Douglas? Are there any questions before we move on? I'm not used to like talking to myself, so.
Yeah, thank you. Kayla, we do have a comment or a question, so I will read it to you. This person says, Kaylee, this is so helpful. What do we do in a situation where the child chooses a friend because of proximity, not because they prefer that person? For example, my child chooses a next door neighbor boy simply because he doesn't need me to walk him down to another neighborhood house. But that boy is not very nice very often, and my child feels that he's not nice.
All
But
right.
like they still will engage with that kid.
Yeah. All right. That's actually, I think, a great segue into the next task, because I'm going to teach you guys about the motivational interviewing spirit. And then I don't know if you listeners have the opportunity to turn your mics on. Is that possible, Susu?
We have not done that in the past, but
okay. It's okay if it's not possible.
We could try it.
Okay, sure.
Because I think we would have to have Shari would have to like turn everyone's mics on. What are you trying?
No, I think I can actually turn on one individual. So I'll work on that in the background, figuring it out.
Beautiful.
And I'll have that ready to go when you're ready for it, Kaylee.
Cool. Okay, so then I'm going to teach you guys the spirit, and then I'm going to have you guys kind of brainstorm about this specific example. Okay, so let me share my screen to show you yet another fun.
And Kaylee, we were also requested if we could have a copy of those two particular sheets with the
100%.
round change process and then those strategies and interventions.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we can get together after this and I can actually send you like everything that I'm sharing because
All
I'm
right.
pretty used to sharing them and sending them already.
Great. So then those will be posted as we post the video of this webinar. We'll have those attached. So you can find those on our pinccsd.org website by tomorrow evening.
Cool. Okay. So this is the underlying spirit of motivational interviewing. The short term is MI. So we know we'll be in the spirit of the conversation because some of these things, if you get down to the skills, you can actually use the skills in a wrong spirit. And your adolescents, they're so perceptive, they are going to smell it, right? And so we have to start with the spirit and then we can nail down the skills and the principles and the strategies. So the spirit is one of collaboration. Now, in the counseling environment, that would be the counselor and the client. So the counselor's not telling the client how to live their life, but it's very appropriate as just being a conversation partner to your adolescent to say, I'm not telling you how to live your life, but what do you think? Let's discuss, right? Eventually, with this kid who thinks that using heroin once a week would be a fantastic idea, even if we have that whole conversation, I'm not going to go, sounds like you've really thought it through, right? Eventually, at the end of the conversation, I'm going to go, thank you for sharing, but I'm your parent and we're not going to do that, right? But in the beginning, we can actually avoid a lot of power struggles. I may never even have to say he's not going to do that because we may never get there if we take a different stance. So collaboration is a big one. Treating a 13-year-old like they have a mind and they can be insightful is a big deal to a 13-year-old. Similarly, compassion, right? So sometimes, let's say I'm talking to someone and I made a choice and I kind of did it to myself, whatever the thing is that I'm struggling through. It actually might be more effective to show compassion for my struggle before bringing it back to, you think since you're hurting so much, you think you maybe don't want to do the other thing too, and then maybe you won't hurt so much, instead of going, well, sounds like you did it to yourself, right? Similarly, acceptance. So this would be acceptance of the person. So think of unconditional positive regard, if you've heard of that. We're fully accepting of this person, even if we're not accepting of their behaviors. Another aspect of acceptance is that radical acceptance of, you're not going to help your children grow into a sober and pro-social functioning adult by telling them what to do all the time. So actually, we want to find all the areas where we can actually accept they're growing into increasing autonomy and help them make those choices, right? So not to the point of permissive or passive parenting, but to the point of, hey, what do you want to make for dinner tonight? Let's make it together. And maybe we're at the store. Hey, if you help me with dinner tonight, let's buy what you want to buy. What do you want to get? Things like that. So accepting the autonomy of the adolescents. And then the last one is evocation. So this is essentially the Socratic method. Instead of telling you what to do, I'm going to try to evoke your understanding of what to do. For example, we talked earlier about choices and consequences. That lies on one of the first laws of boundaries. If you've ever read the book Boundaries, it's fantastic. And one of the first of the 10 laws is the law of sowing and reaping. So sowing and reaping works like, if I am, let me find a fair example. Let's say I'm an adolescent and I get an allowance. And last week I bought a super awesome, expensive video game. And then this week, my best friend asked me to go to the movies. So I go to my parents and I say, hey, parents, so-and-so asked me to go to the movies and I really want to go, but I don't have any money. So can you spot me some money so I can go to the movies? So parents could just say, no, you spent all your money. Or you can evoke, I already know I spent all my money, right? So you might ask a Socratic question like, well, you have an allowance. Why don't you use your allowance to go to the movies? Now I, as the adolescent, have to say, well, I already spent all my allowance and I don't have any money left. Oh, I see. Does that make sense? So then you don't have to repeat information that's already known, and that can kind of disrupt the flow of the conversation. So just right there with that information, I would love to hear from you guys. What are your thoughts about the example that someone threw out about the next door neighbor boy? And I guess we could just raise our hands and then we can give them a mic. Is that true? Or not yet? It's okay if it's not working. I don't need
No, it
to.
is. I can unmute somebody, but I would need to know which person to unmute. So if there are
Raise your
some
hand.
people watching, yeah, let me know. And I see a
So
hand
if you would
raised. Okay,
like, if you would
so
like to talk, you could jot your name down.
I've got
or-
it.
All right.
Orly has raised her hand, so I'm going to allow to talk. All right, Orly, I don't know if I'm saying your name right, but
Yes.
you should be able to speak now.
Can you hear me? Can you hear
Yes.
me? She was talking about the next door neighbor as an example. I just wanted to ask her to give us a little background because not all of us connected to what she's talking about.
Gotcha. Well, just to keep it short, all of the information that we have is that her son is going and playing with this next door neighbor boy who isn't the nicest. And he's playing with him out of convenience rather than this boy being super nice to him. And it sounds like your son has acknowledged that this boy is not the nicest boy. Okay, so that's all we have.
Oh,
So any hand raisers, any ideas? How do we use the spirit of motivational interviewing just to think about this problem?
It looks like we have a quiet audience not raising their hands. Oh, actually, sorry about that. We've got someone.
Oh.
Okay, you should be able to talk.
Yeah, hi.
Oh.
I was thinking perhaps you can ask your son, are you happy playing with this child?
There you go. So what spirit of motivational interviewing would that fall under?
Collaboration?
Absolutely. And probably evocation, right? Okay.
Right.
Thank you for that. So that gets us rolling, right? That would be a way to think about it.
It looks
Anybody
like Orly
else?
has raised her hand again, so I'm gonna give her permission. Oh, she still has permission. Orly, you can go ahead and talk.
I would ask if it's something that has happened in the past more than once or twice, and talk about standing up for yourself.
That might be an aspect of it. Do they even know the
If it's
concept
on-
of standing up for themselves? Have they ever tried it? How to go? Fair enough. All right, keep going. And it's okay if you're wrong. That's allowed.
We were talking about how does it feel to have a friend like who treats you like that, and if you want to keep going with that type of friendship to the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe played out long term.
Maybe ask your child if they've ever asked the friend if there's something wrong, like either happening at home or at school that's causing him not to be nice.
Fair enough. So notice how all of you guys talked about asking the child. So you're off in the right direction, right? Because that's that spirit of collaboration. That's the spirit of evocation. That's the spirit of accepting that this child has a mind and they're capable of engaging in this complex conversation. And actually, this is part of life. I mean, think about this kid's going to grow up one day, and let's say they're working in the office. Do they want to just be friends with the person who has the office next to them? Or do they have other ways of deciding who they spend most of their time with or who they seek out? The child, many of the adolescents that I know that are struggling typically seek out the attention of people whose attention they're sure they can get. And so if you're only willing to seek attention of people who you're sure you can get, you're probably going to get a lower caliber person, honestly. And so there may be this aspect of, well, if I were to make better friends, it'd be harder. It'd be scarier. I might be rejected. They might have other friends, right? So there's all of these developmental tasks rolled into this one question that are fantastic. So I want to move forward to, we talked about the spirit, and now I want to talk about the strategies. So let me pull this up. Okay, so this paper actually has some of the strategies and the principles. Let's do the principles first, because basically it goes spirit, principles, strategies. So these are principles. You can see express empathy, develop discrepancy, roll with resistance, and support self-efficacy. So there's bullet points that are very helpful under all of those. So I'm just going to, due to the time limit, I'm going to share a couple of these that might be related to the situation. So expressing empathy might be something like, it sounds like you're having some struggles with deciding who to be friends with. And it sounds really hard because when you hang out with this one friend, it's easier to hang out with him, but also sometimes it sounds pretty uncomfortable. And then with other friends, you have to be kind of uncomfortable on the front end, even though they might be nicer in the end. So expressing empathy, helping find some of those feelings words, whatever it is, to really flesh out what they're going through. What that's going to do is that's going to put someone in the position of feeling heard. And typically, if we can start there instead of this power struggle, we are positively reinforcing the idea that they told us about this struggle to begin with. So expressing empathy for their struggles, maybe talking about ambivalence being normal. Hey, I kind of understand why you might have a convenience friend. I've had convenience friends too. Sounds like it might be easier sometimes. Or maybe you don't want to make him mad because he's mean to you. Okay, developing discrepancy. This is the idea that with every choice, there is a loss. So if he makes a choice to hang out with this mean friend, there are actually some benefits and there are some losses. Now, typically, the adolescent is going to not be aware of some benefits and they're not going to be aware of some losses. Typically, we minimize the losses of the choice we're currently making, and we minimize the benefits of the other choices that are optional that we choose not to make, right? So we might develop discrepancy of, hey, I see how it's more convenient to hang out with this friend, but it also sounds like it's hurting you. And it's kind of hurting you enough to bring it up with me. Seems like it's weighing on you. So developing that discrepancy. And it also seems like you actually want to hang out with someone else. But it's hard to do that because then you have to ask me to go walk you there. And I understand that's really inconvenient. Rolling with resistance. So rolling with resistance is, you might say something like, we parents are fixers. And so we might say, hey, if we just do this thing, it'll make it easier to hang out with this other kid. And your kid might go, no, that's not going to work. Right? And so that would be some form of resistance. Resistance can be disagreement. Resistance can be sort of shutting down. I don't want to talk about this anymore. Resistance can be denying or minimizing or blaming someone else. It can be all kinds of things. It could be deflecting with humor, whatever it is. So with resistance, rolling with resistance might actually be, instead of saying, don't be such a sad Sally, like we can fix this. Rolling with resistance might be to simply acknowledge, yeah, it sounds like fixing this problem in and of itself is hard for you. It's kind of hard to think of a way around this problem. So that way, the resistance isn't a source of the power struggle. It's part of the adolescent sharing with us. We want to hear those doubts. And then supporting self-efficacy. So that might be something about like, picking friends is part of growing up, and you're growing up and you're figuring out how to pick friends. And right now it sounds like you're kind of trying this one way of doing it, and some of it makes sense to you. It's pretty admirable that you're struggling through this rather than just avoiding it. Supporting the self-efficacy. Okay, so Susu, I'll ask you, are there any questions from the audience on what we've shared about the principles? I'll give you guys a second to frantically type.
Not specifically. Somebody has said this material is super helpful. Can we focus on your wisdom?
Okay. I'm not sure what that quite means.
Where you are helping lead us to the correct answers.
Gotcha. On the
Although
topic?
I would say that, people, as you are processing it yourself, you're either trying to get a better grasp of it, and therefore you will end up putting it into practice.
Yeah, fair
Yeah.
enough. Yeah, I'm taking kind of a motivational interviewing stance with you guys. I will tell you right away that it's been what I've been taught in counseling, as well as my experience in counseling, that if you give advice, it will go bad. And here's how it will go bad. Either the person will refuse your advice, or they will take your advice, and since it's not their idea, they will not try as hard. It's just human nature. We try harder on our own ideas. And so if you come up with solutions, you're naturally going to try to make them work more than if I tell you a solution. And also, if I tell you the solution, that's actually part of that rescuing and that disabling of your own skills if I just give you the answer. Because then you're going to need to come back to me the next time you don't have an answer, right? But since I won't give you the answer, now you have to figure it out on your own. Maybe you complain to another parent that I won't give you the answer, and you talk to them about it, right? That's what I want to happen. And so, yes, it's a matter of the process. And so I'm taking that stance with you guys, and sometimes taking that stance with your adolescents can be most helpful. It can be most generative of self-efficacy. So I'm going to teach you the principles, just like you try to teach your adolescent the principles, and then you have to figure it out and drive your own car. Absolutely. So the last part of it is here on the left. These are the actual specific interventions. So if you're trying to make baby step improvements, these are it. Okay. We're not going to go over all of them, because my recommendation to you would be that you can do something like, you can YouTube open-ended questions. You can YouTube affirmations. I actually have a whole handout right here, which I can attach, that gives lots of examples. So this is an area where I want you to be self-efficacious and have at it. okay? Because there's lots of information here. Reflective listening is probably your best way to start when someone's trying to share. Affirmation, the best marriage researcher that I know of says for every negative interaction, you need 5 to 7 positive ones. And a negative interaction and a positive interaction can just be like positive interaction when you walk in the room, I say hi. I acknowledge you walked into the room. A negative interaction could be you walked in the room and I'm just busy doing my own thing. So for every one, we need 5 to 7. Start there. A lot of parents really struggle with finding negative affirmations for kids who are misbehaving. And so that's where I would recommend you engage in some of your own counseling and some of your own reading, because you can affirm even negative behavior, such as, sounds like you're really passionate about this topic. It sounds like this is really important to you. Sounds like you're exploring the value of lying, and that means that you are doing your best to figure out how this world works and how you fit into it. I'm not affirming the lying, right? But there's that tenacity and that just insatiable desire for growth in all of your adolescents. They're going to grow. It's just a matter of how are they going to grow? That is the question. So pushing ourselves to find affirmations can be another way. You can Google affirmations. You can Google positive character traits, all of those kind of things. And then open-ended questions. Think of the Socratic method. You could do research on that. You can just practice open-ended questions. Practice turning a closed-ended question into an open-ended question. All right. So I think I'm pretty proud of myself. I only ran 2 minutes over. So it's Q&A time, I believe.
You're doing good. We technically have till 11:15.
Okay.
So there are a couple of questions here, and you can figure out how you want to answer them. When there is resistance to comply, how do we go about it? That's kind of a loaded question.
It is. I would refer you back to the spirit of motivational interviewing, because resistance to comply probably means you have one goal and your adolescent has another goal. So for example, I get lots of adolescents in the residential level of treatment who go, I found another place to live. My parents just live to control me, and I'm living to try to figure out who I am. So yeah, I'm out. And after I do the intake process, I bring them together and I go, I think you guys have the same goal. I think everyone here wants you out of the house and not homeless, right? So let's work on that. I don't think your parents are going to lock you in the house when you turn 18. So what needs to happen in the family system to get you out of the house? Doesn't mean we're going to do it at 14 and a half, right? But we can all agree nobody wants to parent you at 24 in the way that they're doing now. So same page. So that might be my first area of exploration is there a choices and consequence problem that may be a separate issue? Have you fully explored the issue? So oftentimes we view resistance as negative instead of resistance as feedback. So motivational interviewing would actually blame resistance on the counselor, or in your case, the parent. And they would say that if you're getting resistance as a counselor, that's feedback that you're not in tune with the client. So that reframes the power struggle again, right? It's not that I have a bad client or that I'm a bad counselor. It's that there's something not connecting. So that would be my encouragement for the resistance is there for a reason, and you may not fully understand the resistance, and therefore you may play the part of the system. It's like, no, we can do it. This is what you should do. This is how you should do it. And then your kid plays the part of the system of, no, And we know that when people get into conflict, there's a tendency to get polarized and rigid. So sometimes if we come over to the other end, so if they're saying, no, 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 it won't work, it can be helpful to go over to that place and go, okay, it won't work. I'm not saying it will. Help me understand why it won't work. Okay, so if it's not going to work, then what? So that's a place to start, but remember, this entire concept is a concept of process. And so a lot of it is going to be, what is one next choice that's going to be more in the empowerment direction than in the conflict and the power struggle direction? And then we'll go from there and we'll have a new choice.
Thank you. Those are really great reminders of that you're not looking for a quick fix. You're not looking, this is a real paradigm shift for some people who are used to doling out demands or suggestions for their kids as if we doled out our Halloween candy. And it requires you to really stop and chew on this more.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering, Kaylee, for those people who are really still trying to wrap their heads around this very process-oriented approach, if there is a little shortcut that they could jot on a note card and they can have it by their desk, or they can put it on their mirror. They can put it in different places to just remind themselves, okay, we're trying a new approach. We're tired of power struggles. We're going to use those power struggles to inform us, to give us feedback. So is there something that you can give us that can bring it down to some real tangible things?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would really stick to just this side of this paper. Don't pick all four, just pick one, and then pick one aspect of the one. So for example, let's say I am a demanding parent, right? So I just tell my kids what to do. I tell them to take out the trash. I tell them to go to bed, whatever the things are. So I might start to try to change that to open-ended questions, right? So I might include some affirmations, whatever it is, right? So I might start to ask them to take the trash out, because the reality is, when your kid is 17, you cannot tell them to take the trash out, right? You can ask them to take the trash out and they can agree, but they're a 17-year-old fully grown human. You're not going to make them take the trash out, right? So making some of those small tweaks. Hey, I would really appreciate it if you could take the trash out while I'm making dinner. Will you do that now? And then if you get some resistance, no? Okay. What do you think would be better? So choices and consequences would be, what do you think would be better? If you do it now, or we set an alarm and you do it in 10 minutes. Right? So just offering some of those choices. Now, of course, this isn't going to change your entire relationship with your child, okay? So if you're in power struggle after power struggle every day, is that conversation going to change your whole world? No. So some of these may be, counseling may be indicated in order to get you started, but if you're still in a place where things may be manageable, you can change closed-ended questions to open-ended questions. You can sneak 5 affirmations in there each day, or you can reflectively listen. So my mantra for reflectively listening is, you don't need to respond. Right? So every time they talk, You don't need to respond. Just say what you think you heard. Just small changes.
Would you be kind enough to give us a few open-ended questions and compare them to what a parent might instinctively go to as far as a closed question? Like
Sure.
how could you transition your typical approach? And maybe you could take something for like a 8 or 10-year-old, closed to open,
Mhm.
teenager, closed to open.
Mhm. All right. That's a great plan. So let me go ahead and think of some of those. How about, would anyone like to give me a closed-ended question? You can type it out or you can raise your hand, whatever works.
Go ahead, Julie.
You don't want to go to that party, do you?
That's a great one. Okay. So closed-ended questions can be answered with a yes, a no, or a short answer. Okay. So such as, what's your birthday? So if you're looking to have a conversation, you might just delete do you and delete the first part. Tell me why you want to go to the party. See how that works?
Right.
Tell me what's good about it. That's a great question. Any others? Give me some examples.
Well, we've all been taught not to ask our kids, how was your day? I mean, since they were little.
Right. Yeah. Ironically, how was your day is kind of an open-ended question. The problem is that most people answer it with fine, which is a short answer. So that actually may be a question where you might get more specific. So you might say something like, tell me what was the best thing that happened today? Or tell me what the least horrible class was today, or things like that. So that I think the problem is that kids answer how was your day with fine because they just went to school and they're tired and they don't want to put the mental effort into expounding. And so sometimes just asking different questions. I think I have a PDF that's probably easy to Google, and it's like 25 ways to ask your kids, how was your day, without asking, how was your day? I'm a huge fan of 2 highs and a low, if anyone knows what that is. 2 highs, what were the best 2 things about your day, and what was the worst thing about your day? Do it at dinner, have everybody do it. Most of the time, you're going to get fairly surface answers. But once you get in the swing of it, that's when you actually make it like a, well, Sally called me ugly today, so that sucked. Oh, thank you for sharing. You want to expound on that, or were you just hoping to share?
I see, Orly, that your hand is still up. I'm not sure if that is from earlier or from right now, but it looks like we'll give you a chance to speak if you'd like to.
So I know it sounds very it sounds wonderful when you hear it from that kind of like perspective, but when you try everything and you feel like it's failing, like you do all these techniques and a child is becoming into his teenagers where he's at a stage that he's not willing to cooperate, and there is consequences and he's not willing to cooperate, there is always an outlet. And he drags the consequences, and he drags, and he's not, and slowly, you talk to them and about to their senses and the consequences and the outcomes of their behavior if they don't change, and they're just not willing to change, cooperate, or make any or even communicate anymore because they're tired of hearing mommy's lectures, or as they
Mhm.
so, and they just slowly, you see them turning away and shutting down and just living their own world in their own world, but because they do have an outlet to go to. How do you approach a child who's slowly, muting you and in not responding to the choices that they have in the house, and consequences, the boundaries of the house and stuff like that? They just
Yeah,
tune you out.
that's a great question. So I would first of all reframe that into a problem, from a problem statement about the child into a problem statement about yourself. So oftentimes parents' problem statements are something like, my kid is using, my kid is disrespectful, my kid won't listen to me, my kid doesn't like to be around me. And the problem with those things is that I don't know what your problem is, right? So it would be something like, I don't like it when my kid doesn't want to hang out with me, or I feel unheard and my kid is shutting me out, or my kid is using drugs and I'm against drugs. So just making that initial shift onto yourself takes away the victim stance, because remember that victims don't have power over the present problem. So if you are making goals for someone else, you're actually setting yourself up to be a victim. Now, sometimes making goals for someone else who's cooperative with you works, right? So I'm not saying never do that, because many of us, someone else has made a goal for us and we just agree with it, so we do it, right? But ironically, we're not doing it because they're telling us to do it. We're doing it because we choose to do it. So sometimes that works. When it doesn't work, then we have to reframe that into a problem for ourselves. Okay, so this doesn't match my values. I'm anxious. I don't know how to. I have run out of options, etc. And when you can reframe it into your own problem statement, if it is true that you have come to an impasse and you feel as though your progress is stalling, I would highly recommend, I'm going to break my own rule here and I'm going to give you straight advice. Get your own counselor. I cannot say it any different than that. Because if you are stuck, there's nothing more helpful than an outside perspective who doesn't know your situation and isn't bought into the outcome. And so that's where I would highly encourage you, step out of that helpless, powerless, hopeless place and into counseling. And the counseling is, again, you can't bring the counseling into, my child is using, please help me stop my child using, right?
Mhm.
It's going to need to be, I am struggling with parenting. I am struggling with the family functioning. And so here's how I'm showing up. Maybe I don't even know how I'm showing up because it's hard to observe yourself. I don't even try to observe myself. I go to counseling. And so counseling isn't for people who are broken enough. Counseling is for wise people who ask for help. And so those would be those things, is when you go to counseling, you're going to start to observe, how do I show up into the family? And is that my only choice? Do I have other options? Is there a reason I ruled out other options? Is there a reason why I've chosen this choice? And again, the outcome of counseling being successful is not that your kid stops using. It's that you feel more confident in how you show up as a parent or how you show up as a member of the family system. So I would highly encourage you that modeling this behavior is one of the best things you can do to show your adolescent that, they already know, by the way, their developmental stage is, turns out my parents aren't always right. And actually, I think they're wrong all the time. So if you go to counseling, you can actually, that's an empowerment step of agreeing with your adolescent. Hey, adolescent, you think I'm wrong all the time? I actually think I might be wrong some of the time too. And so I'm going to go explore that. So if you really feel stuck, admit you're stuck.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
Okay, never mind.
Did you have a follow-up, Orly?
Well, I said then when we do that, and that doesn't help either.
Change counselors.
And that doesn't
I,
help either, but it's,
yeah, I have talked to many parents who have gone to counseling. The primary problem that I see with parents who pick counselors is often they pick counselors who are individual counselors. So in the state of Colorado, you have different licenses for counseling. The license for individually focused counselors is licensed professional counselor or licensed addiction counselor. Those would be people who tend to see individuals. The license for people who tend to see families and couples is a licensed marriage and family therapist. Now, I'm kind of an odd duck. I'm an LPC and an LAC, so I have the license for individuals, but I'm the family therapist. So your second question would not just be what kind of license do you hold, but how much of your caseload and how many families have you seen before? Because you may have an LMFT, a family therapist, who has been practicing for 6 months and they've seen 10 families. You may have an LPC like myself, who I am the family therapist. I specialize in families and I don't even know how many families I've seen, but I could probably ballpark it in maybe upwards of 150. And so that asking the right questions, finding someone, you may be trying LPC after LPC after LPC who doesn't understand family systems. So I joke, I saw a meme on Facebook that said counseling is for people who deal with counseling is for people who deal with people who won't go to counseling. Right? So if you're one of those people, you're probably looking for someone who's family systems oriented. They see families and they're going to see you as an individual, but in effort of changing the family system. So if they're not a systems thinker, they're going to think just like you are, and they're not going to have the perspective that you're needing in order to try to intervene in this system. So beyond counseling, I understand that money is a thing. And so my main recommendation is Al-Anon. That's Al-Anon. That's the sister group to AA. Al-Anon is not for alcoholics, it's for the loved ones of alcoholics. And it has a very, very much systems perspective to it. And the idea of Al-Anon is, how do we become sane even if our alcoholic continues to use? But embedded in that is being a better influence on the alcoholic. And so it's very possible your adolescent needs a higher level of care. It's also very possible you're going from essentially counselor who doesn't do this to counselor who doesn't do this to counselor who doesn't do this. And I am the first one to say we counselors like to help people. And so sometimes we will harmfully agree to see clients who we don't actually have a ton of experience with. And sometimes counselors will continue to see clients who they're really not making progress with, instead of calling it for what it is. So some of that, I hope that information is helpful, and I would be happy to answer any other questions about finding a counselor, because sadly, it's hard to find a counselor who specializes in resistant adolescents.
Mhm.
That's such great information to educate all of us about the difference of counseling and all those crazy letters behind people's names.
Absolutely.
And as a different type of therapist myself, I tell all my families, you don't connect with everybody, and you need to find the person you connect with. So thank you for encouraging that process. I really appreciate all of this process-oriented talk. I wanted to pull up just a couple of more great ideas that were passed on in our Q&A when talking about how to discuss the day with your kiddos. Heather Robbins says, we do popsicle to talk about the high, poopsicle to talk about the low, and dreamsicle to talk about your hope for tomorrow. And they do this at dinner every night. I
love that.
was so clever. Someone else said they use peak as a good Colorado family, best moment of the day, and pit for your bummer moment. And you don't have to have a pit, but you do share your peak. If we have a moment and then there's one more about the rose, bud, and the thorn. I think that's from Kristen. Oh my gosh,
I see that one from Bobby Turner. Yeah, I like that one.
Yes, that is from our mindfulness expert, Janice. Who is that? Kristen
Race, but
oh my
I don't
gosh, thank you.
think
Kristen
she
Race.
coined it. I think she borrowed it from someone else. It's one of those hard to know the actual origin of that.
Yeah. We have one more question here, and maybe you have a quick suggestion. How would you approach shifting a preteen from a behavior that used to seem healthy, such as engaging in TikTok, that has now turned unhealthy? Now a source of self-worth, views ideas like suicide as a solution. So,
yeah, I love that question because it actually starts with the idea of compassion, that the behavior was first chosen for actually a functional reason, right? And so oftentimes when I'm working with parents of adolescents, their parenting style was first chosen when their kids were small and it worked great. And now they're doing more of the same and they're not getting the same results. And so to be really fair, it's probably a great parenting style for smaller kids. Sometimes it's a great parenting style for kids who are just like more compliant by nature. Sometimes to parent kids who are more compliant by nature with a more like directive stance is fine. But other kids, one of my favorite books, what is her last name is Rubin, but it's called The Four Tendencies, and it's how people respond to expectations. And so that's a great book. It's nice and short. There's an audiobook version of it. There's also just some like handouts of it that you can Google to like get you familiar with the idea that different people respond to expectations differently. So what might be helpful is in motivational interviewing, there's actually a motivational decision tree where you have 2 columns and you have 2 rows. And so you're essentially going to put a cross in the middle of your piece of paper. So for each row, you would have something like what the choice is or what the alternative is. And for each column, you have pros and cons. So pros of remaining the same with TikTok, cons of remaining the same with TikTok. And then it would be pros of change with TikTok, and then cons of change with TikTok. Now, some of these are going to be like a little bit redundant, but by putting it in that way, you might actually, it just stretches your brain a little bit to think. So TikTok is a tool. It's not a master. And it sounds like the tool has become the master. For some of us adults, our iPhones are tools and they have become masters, so we can relate. And so it sounds like for reasons why the adolescent may be able to verbalize, they started using it as a tool. And so you might actually explore, what are the reasons why you started using this? It connects you with people, it's fun, it's humorous, etc. Okay, now what are the indications that it might have become a master? I'm starting to feel anxious when I don't check it. I check it like lots. And when I don't have the things pop up on TikTok that I want to have, I feel bad. I'm noticing that the affirmation I get on TikTok is no longer voluntary. I kind of like compulsively have to have it or I feel bad. So that might be something that the adolescent themselves could begin exploring to figure out, is there a way for it to go back into the tool category? Or what's going to happen if we continue to let it be our master? Usually when I ask people what's going to happen if we continue behaving this way, they say things will stay the same. But ironically, that's not how our entire universe works. Our entire universe breaks down unless we intervene. So think of your house is going to break down unless you upkeep it, right? But we don't typically think of our souls that way. We just think if we keep behaving this way, we'll stay the same. That's not true. Our souls need fuel and they need upkeep. And if we neglect them, they will naturally break down. And so that might be what kind of the adolescent is not learned yet, is that there's a certain amount of upkeep, and maybe TikTok has become sort of that upkeep and it's beginning to eclipse some other things. Gretchen Rubin, yes, that's the name. So I hope that helps of, you're really just helping them to start to think in a different way. And to be fair, when your kids are like, when they're in the 5 to 10 range, they are not cognitively capable of doing some of this work. So if you're not used to having these conversations with them, that's not surprising to me, because they probably couldn't have these conversations before.
Kaylee, this has just been a wonderful way to start the morning on this crazy day, to just rethink the way we think, the way we talk, the way we engage with others. Would you be kind enough to tell us your contact information, if you're okay with people contacting you regarding questions about that they have about this, or even potentially reaching out in a more
Absolutely.
personal and
Yeah.
professional manner.
Later or now?
Well, you can tell it to us so that it is part of this recording.
Sure.
And if you have it, you can share it written and it can be on the screen. But at least if you want to tell it to us, that would be great.
Wonderful. So I will actually type it in as I'm saying it. So Kaylee Childs, LPC, LAC. So remember, that's the personal counselor and the addictions counselor. I would highly encourage you guys to find, I'm going to write it here, LMFTs. If they're not an LMFT like myself, you can ask some of those questions like, do you see couples and families? Do you see what we would call resistant adolescents? And how many and how often and how much of your caseload are those people? So I work at Sandstone Care in Cascade, Colorado. That is residential level of care. Sandstone, I love Sandstone. If you Google them and you just call the main line, they will help you find the right level of care. And if it's not provided by Sandstone, they will help you find someone else who is a good match for you. So that's why I just put all of the stuff on our admissions team to help filter people in the right direction. I am quite busy, so I don't give out my personal Sandstone number because that's typically for our adolescents and their parents who are in the residential level of care. But another option, I work at Barber Family Counseling in Colorado Springs, and their main line is 719-644-6131. And they would be a good option if you're looking for a counselor. I supervise several people at that location, and there's not a single counselor who's not an awesome, killing it person there. And at this, there are many drawbacks to COVID, but there are also a lot of good parts to it, including telehealth services. And so if you don't live in Colorado Springs, or maybe you don't live in Denver and you want to see a counselor in Denver, you kind of can at this point. And so I would encourage you guys to utilize those resources, even if you're not geographically in the same area.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We will hold on to that information. For a reminder for all of you, we will be meeting again with another therapist from Sandstone Cares, Brannon
Pruitt.
Thank you. Brannon Pruitt. And he will be continuing this conversation in a different vein, more related to substance abuse, marijuana, vaping. So feel free to pass that information on to any of your contacts or friends or family who might really be struggling with this and feel like they don't have a resource of how to get support and help. Thank you for this really informative talk. We'll look forward to receiving your handouts and making those available on our website so that people, as they go back and listen one more time and try and incorporate what you've said, that they can have those handouts as well to look at. So we thank all of you for being here. I want to thank our PIN board members that you saw at the beginning, and you may see right now if you have all of the panelists up. We have joined together and continue working behind the scenes to bring you some great programming to support you as you continue to do parenting in a new way with developing new skills. So thank you, PIN board members. Thank you, all of you who have joined us, and a special thanks to Kaylee for her insight and elaboration on this way to improve our lives. So we'll see you next Tuesday night, November 10th at 6:30 in the evening.
Thank you
Alrighty.
guys. You're a great audience.
Thank you, everybody. See you next week.